Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our session, Telling the American Story, Interpreting Native History in Your Classroom. Next slide, please. The National Museum of the American Indian consists of two museums located in Washington, D.C. and New York City. We have a third location that houses our collection and is known as the Cultural Resources Center. The mission of the National Museum of the American Indian is that, in partnership with Native peoples and their allies, we will foster a richer shared human experience through a more informed understanding of Native peoples. Next slide, please. The team that will be leading your session today are myself, Adrienne Smith. I am Cherokee and Muskogee Creek from Oklahoma. I've been with NMAI for about 19 years, and I am the program coordinator for the Family and Youth Experiences team. Next, we have Gabby Lee.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gabby. I'm a museum educator. I've been with the National Museum of the American Indian for 3.5 years, and I'm originally from Kailua, Oahu, Hawaii.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jenny Samios, and I'm also a museum educator. I've been with NMAI since 2020, and I'm originally from Leesburg, Virginia.
Hi, my name is Shannon Mitchell, and I'm from South Florida. I started with NMAI as an intern in the Cultural Interpreters Department, and now I'm a museum educator, and I've been working on site since January.
And hi there, my name is Shannon Wagner. I'm the lead museum educator with the Family and Youth Experiences team at NMAI. I started in 2019, and today I have the privilege of being the chat moderator. Next slide, please.
So here we are looking at our agenda for the session. We're going to be discussing perspective taking, interpreting with a Native perspective, showcasing how we use compelling questions in our work, and then sharing examples of how we interpret various events. Next slide, please.
Okay, so the goal of our session is to amplify Indigenous perspectives to foster a more complete understanding of history. And by the end of this session, our objectives are that we hope you will be able to identify the importance of Native perspective in relation to teaching about American Indians, also to gain skills on how to interpret American Indian cultures from Native perspectives, and lastly, to be empowered to implement more inclusive narratives in your classrooms using some of the techniques we share today. Next slide, please.
So, before we begin, we want to gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. A land acknowledgement is a traditional custom that dates back centuries in many Native nations and communities. Today, land acknowledgements are used by many Native peoples and non Native peoples to recognize Indigenous people who are stewards of the lands on which all of us now live. The museum's acknowledgement is intended to recognize the Indigenous peoples who have lived where we now work and over the long span of human history and the large contemporary Native population that lives in the Washington, D.C. area and New York City today. Land acknowledgements are important in that they are a starting point to understanding the history that has brought you to reside on the land you live on. It also acknowledges Indigenous peoples' relationships to land. Native nations, communities, families, and individuals today sustain their sense of belonging to ancestral homelands and protect these connections through Indigenous languages, oral traditions, ceremonies, and other forms of cultural expression. Land is a part of who we are, both past, present, and future. If you have any questions about land acknowledgements, please drop them in the chat. Next slide, please.
The National Museum of the American Indian has over 800,000 objects in its collection. Our collections represent over 2,000 different Native communities from North, Central, South America, as well as huge parts of the Pacific. These objects range from the historical to the contemporary, like the object that you see photographed here. This object is currently on view at our DC Museum on the fourth level. At first glance, this object looks like an American flag, but when we look closer, you'll see that there are some notable differences. So this flag is made up of thousands and thousands of beads. In the blue, where the states would be, are all 50 state abbreviations listed in the order in which they became part of the United States. Between the lines in light blue are famous quotes of both white Americans and Native Americans. Within the red and white stripes, you will see the names of hundreds of tribes within the United States. This object was made by Jenny Ann Chapoose Taylor of the Ute Nation in 2002, shortly after the September 11th attacks. It's titled Nations, a Mourning Tribute, and it shows how American history and American Indian history are indivisible. Next slide, please. So we have a few resources that we want to point out before we dive deeper into our presentation. First, Native Knowledge 360, which is a website that was developed in 2018 that was made in collaboration with Native communities, national and state education agencies, and educators, adapted these key concepts to reflect the rich and diverse cultures, histories, and contemporary lives of Native peoples. NK360 provides educational materials, virtual student programs, and teacher training that incorporate Native narratives, more comprehensive histories, and accurate information to enlighten and inform teaching and learning about Native America. NK360 challenges common assumptions about Native peoples and offers a view that includes not only the past, but also the vibrancy of Native peoples and cultures today. The direct link will be dropping in the chat. And another resource that the museum has produced is the Americans Dialogue Toolkit. This downloadable free PDF toolkit provides basic grounding in the practice of dialogue and includes 3 60-minute models focused on grades 4th through 12th that educators can use in the Americans exhibition to facilitate dialogue with students. Through the intentional use of dialogue, educators can tap into the Americans material to facilitate new conversations with and among students about the power of images and words, the challenges of memory, and the relationship between personal and national values. The toolkit should be dropped in the chat. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Shannon. So, as an educator, when looking at history and cultures, one important skill to use is perspective taking. We're going to do a short activity on perspective taking. So, I'd like to ask you the question of what does the idea of home mean to you? So, we're going to post this question in the chat. Think about the way it makes you feel. Is there a particular smell you associate with it? Is it a particular location? Is home a particular time or memory? Now think about the way you feel when you travel or go somewhere new. What do you have to think about or keep in mind when you are in a new and different place? Do you act differently than when you are at home? How so? Please share with us in the chat. So, Ellen Galinsky from Mind in the Making states that perspective taking involves the intellectual skill of discerning how someone else thinks and feels. It requires assembling our accumulated knowledge of that person, analyzing the situation at hand, remembering similar situations, recalling what others have told us about such situations, putting aside our own thoughts and feelings, and trying to think and feel as another person must think and feel. Next slide, please. So we've had a short look at perspective taking. Now take a moment and think about how you would answer this question. What is Native perspective? Now ask yourself, what does Native perspective mean to you? Feel free to share in the chat. There are many pervasive myths and stereotypes about American Indians that exist in the American consciousness today. Many of them are derived from complex relationships and conflicts amongst American Indian nations and the United States government and citizens. One such myth is that the Americas were a vast wilderness. Words like savage, uncivilized, and unsettled are pervasive and used to support this myth. When in actuality, each tribal nation had a complex society with their own languages, laws, and traditions. Next slide, please. Providing Native perspective and interpretation involves critically evaluating assumptions and stereotypes of Native peoples, introducing and assessing multiple perspectives, and giving Native perspectives equal priority and authority. Including Native voices from the past and present whenever possible is fundamental when providing a Native perspective. You may or may not come from a Native community, but regardless, you will still be speaking on behalf of cultures you may be unfamiliar with. The following are ways that you may incorporate Native perspective into your classroom and lessons. One, use knowledge, ideas, and facts that you have learned from specific Native communities. Whether you learn this from personal experience, a documentary, a speaker, a book, tribal website, etc., as long as it's a credible source. Two, when speaking about Native cultures, develop very specific examples and do not generalize. If you are talking about teepees, for example, speak about its relevance to a specific tribe such as Crow or Lakota, not just Plains Indians. Because even within these two tribes I just listed, their teepees are designed very differently. So always use very specific examples. Third, be prepared to negotiate intertribal disagreements or differences. Even within a single tribe, there are varying viewpoints and perspectives. Work toward telling narratives that are acceptable to all, but do not say all Native peoples or all tribes do these things. Fourth, you want to embrace controversial topics and speak about them from a Native perspective. And last, you always want to acknowledge multiple truths. Providing a Native perspective does not mean we are rewriting history, but it does open up the possibility for yourself and your students to change their viewpoint on specific events or preconceived notions. The more you know about individual diverse tribal nations, the easier it will be for you to convey appreciation and sensitivity in concrete ways. Being prepared to overcome cultural barriers will help you broaden your students' perceptions in meaningful ways. And just know it is always okay to tell your students you don't know something when you don't know the answer to a specific Native topic. The examples that you're going to see today that we are sharing will revert back to one of these perspective tools. Next slide, please. So within my unit's programming, we use compelling questions like you see here. The questions may either be asked out loud or to the audience, or they may be used to guide the educators to stay on track with the content they are teaching. These compelling questions help us to focus our content, and we don't just want our students to learn about American Indians and be done. We've checked that off our list. No, we want our students to be engaged in critical thinking, to challenge the interpretations they are taught about Native American history. This is to help them question what they may know about something. For example, questioning why Columbus Day was created with or celebrated with the question, why do we celebrate a holiday after a lost explorer? Last, we use the questions as an evaluation tool for the museum educators to make sure that the students have an understanding based on their conversations throughout the program. Next slide, please. How do you develop a compelling question, you may ask? Compelling questions ask the big question of why people do the things they do. They enable students to examine how individuals and groups interact with each other, and then why those interactions go well and not so well. To develop a compelling question, it must be relevant to your students' or learners' lives and interests. You want to look for common ground in the topic. There may be themes that can relate. For example, the perspective taking we talked about earlier and home. That is a theme. Compelling questions must speak to important ideas and issues that are worth examining. So, if you have specific standards on Native people, cultures, or history to cover in your classroom, then what are those important issues that are worth examining? Next, you have challenging. You want to make it open ended. Can the students be engaged in the question? Next, you want to write it like a hook. You want them to be able to grab onto them and have them notice these. You want to provide just enough content to preview the story to come. And last, you want to make sure it's equity focused. Is there bias in the question? Is there room for argument? Once you've finished your brainstorming and asking if it is relevant, important, challenging, written like a hook, and equity focused, then you can begin to put your compelling question together using this formula. You have your question word, which is the how, the why, the what, or did. You have your topic or issue, and then you have your intended target or purpose. So, next, my team is going to share with you examples of compelling questions and see if you can put each one in the formula. If you have any questions on perspective taking, please drop them in the chat. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Adrian. So our first compelling question, oh wait. So our first compelling question is, how did a brunch in the forest get Indians in our heads? Just by hearing this question, you might have an idea what this is referring to. The first Thanksgiving, a quintessential American holiday. The story of Thanksgiving is a popular story that Americans like to tell about Native peoples. However, these stories are often false and incomplete. It's important to acknowledge Thanksgiving as a story and to discuss the different parts that make up a story. So, asking questions like, what's your favorite story? And what is it about that story that makes you like it so much? This allows students to share information about themselves. I'll ask all of you, what about the story of Thanksgiving do you like so much? You can share answers in the chat. Through the conversation, we see that each story has different parts. So there's the setting, characters, plot, conclusion, and there are often different narrators. So the ways in which these parts come together can make for an interesting story. And it's important to extract fiction from fact. Next slide, please. So, depending on who is telling the story, key information can be missing. These postcards from our collection tell the typical story of the first Thanksgiving. So, Native peoples and the pilgrims coming together to share a meal and express thanks for their harvest. Native peoples and pilgrims are always vital characters or participants in the story of the first Thanksgiving. Going back to what Adrian mentioned, when thinking about how to teach Thanksgiving, be specific about the Native cultures and do not generalize. Native Americans are often depicted as nameless, generic Indians who merely shared a meal with the intrepid pilgrims. The real story is much deeper, richer, and more nuanced. The Native peoples in attendance were from the Wampanoag Nation around Cape Cod in present day Massachusetts, and they played a lead role in this historic encounter. And they had been essential to the survival of the colonists during the newcomers' first year. The Wampanoag were a people with a sophisticated society who had occupied the region for thousands of years. They had their own government, their own religious and philosophical beliefs, their own knowledge system, and their own culture. They were also people for whom giving thanks was a part of daily life. Today, the three primary communities of Wampanoag people in Massachusetts are Mashpee on Cape Cod, Aquina, Gayhead on Martha's Vineyard, and Herring Pond in South Plymouth. Now that we've learned more about the characters in the story of Thanksgiving, how about the plot of the story? Is it acknowledging multiple truths, or is it a little bit more one sided? We're going to watch a short clip to understand the story of Thanksgiving. Next slide, please.
It happened, but nobody really cared. It wasn't like, oh, remember that time, last November, let's have those folks over again, fire up the grill. Nobody thought that because it was just a thing that happened. But the Pilgrim folks there, they were writing letters or writing journals. They were like really meticulously detailing what was happening. But even that written account gets lost for basically 200 years and doesn't even emerge until the 1840s when this document is discovered again. And even then, it's not a big deal. It's actually in a footnote. And we remember that, we rescue it from being a footnote because that has meaning now. And so by the early 20th century, Indians are an indivisible part of what creates the United States.
So this video is featured in both our on-site and online exhibition of Americans. And we will be dropping the link to this video in the chat. So this video is narrated by one of the Americans exhibition curators, Paul Chatt-Smith, who is Comanche. And the video is saying that the Thanksgiving holiday we celebrate today is a way to celebrate America as we want it to be: peaceful, generous, and welcoming. But what the story leaves out is that the country came about at a great expense to Native peoples. It also mentions that the actual event of the first Thanksgiving was forgotten over time and then re-emerged in the 1800s. Playing this video for students is a great springboard to spur conversation and idea sharing, especially the quote, and the way it's corny, it's cartoonish and kitsch. It's kind of a protective layer to sort of not get too direct about it. So underneath all those things, Thanksgiving is about trying to come to terms with this very difficult truth about the United States. So let's look deeper into this difficult truth. Next slide, please. So from the historical records and journals, we know that a feast took place in Massachusetts in October of 1621. So not a Thursday in November. Colonists engaged in negotiations with the Wampanoag Nation, and it was a 3-day event. This event was only written down 2 times in history, and it was not a big deal. The feast was forgotten for more than 200 years until President Abraham Lincoln made it a federal holiday in the 1860s. So the way the story is told is actually a little different to what happened. So this image that we see here on the screen shows a Wampanoag leader engaged in a diplomatic meeting with the governor of Plymouth Colony. You can see them both sitting on the ground, they're engaged in a conversation, and the event that took place in 1621 may have been like this kind of gathering, which was focused on political alliances, diplomacy, and trying to negotiate peace than the way the story is often depicted today. It's a little different to that embellished story of a picnic in the forest between friendly neighbors coming together in harmony. Instead, the colonists were on lands of the Wampanoag Nation. In addition to land loss, the Wampanoag Nation also experienced a tremendous human loss. When Europeans arrived in America, they brought diseases that Native peoples could not fight off, most likely smallpox or possibly yellow fever. By the time of the first Thanksgiving, that event in 1621, the Wampanoag who were present at the event had already lost 90% of their population from these diseases. So at that time, already in the 1600s, they were experiencing extreme loss, and that's why some negotiations needed to happen, because these groups needed to come together and address how they were going to live together peacefully. Within only a few decades after the first Thanksgiving, another wave of diseases killed 50% of the remaining Wampanoag population. The story of the first Thanksgiving and the way we celebrate it today fails to acknowledge this difficult history. It narrows in on one aspect of the event, which was the Harvest Festival, leaving out the rest of the story. And Wampanoag people aren't usually the narrators. There's talk about the conflict of Plymouth Colony, like dealing with harsh winters, but again, we only see one side of the story and the way that it shapes our understanding of Thanksgiving and leaves out that Wampanoag perspective. So the first Thanksgiving was just the beginning of a long history of interactions between American Indians and immigrants. It was not a single event that can easily be recreated. The meal that is ingrained in American consciousness represents much more than a simple harvest celebration or brunch. It was a turning point in history. Thank you, and please post any questions you may have in the chat. And now I will pass it to Gabby. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Shannon, for sharing about Thanksgiving and really complicating that narrative. So now I'd like to switch gears and move a little bit forward to a different period in American history, which is the period of about the mid 1800s and the period of American Indian removal. Now, removal can be a difficult topic for students and for teachers because it can get complicated legally, but also because of the inherent darkness that surrounds this topic and the topic of forced removal. So to address this, we start off with a complex yet simple question. What does it mean to remove a people? This is one of the main compelling questions we use when talking about American Indian removal because it allows us to explore specific examples. So on the map, you see some of the Native nations that were affected by removal. And while allowing students to explore these specific examples, we also understand the bigger picture of how removal happened and the impact that it had on real people. We find that students understand this historical period when we share specific stories from several Native nations that experienced and were targeted by the Indian Removal Act. Some of the stories we share include the Muskogee Nation, the Potawatomi, the Cherokee Nation, and others. But for some historical context, the Indian Removal Act was a law signed and passed by Andrew Jackson in 1830. And up to that point, in the United States, there was a growing feeling that American expansion was being hindered by Native nations that had claim to some of the most sought after lands on the continent. These lands included the southeastern part of the United States, what's now Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana. And up to that point, every president had dealt with this. But Jackson was willing to take drastic measures to solve what they called at the time the Indian problem. When the Removal Act was passed, it allowed the US to grant unsettled lands west of the Mississippi River in exchange for Indian lands that were within existing states' borders. Indian nations east of the Mississippi, like the ones you see on the screen, the map, were promised money, supplies, protection on a journey to Indian Territory, what is now the state of Oklahoma, in exchange for giving up their homelands. President Jackson signed over 70 removal treaties with Native nations, and each nation had a very tough decision to make when facing the challenge of this US policy and these treaties. So when we ask the question, what does it mean to remove a people? There are many answers because there's not just one removal experience. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But other compelling questions that can be asked are, does removal make sense? How did Native nations try to avoid removal? And even the question we talked about earlier, what does home mean to you? These questions can help direct students as they explore the stories of different nations and how they each responded to the Indian Removal Act in a different way. Next slide, please. So here you see another question and an example of an activity that we use in the museum, but can also be used in the classroom. And it asks the question, what would you do? So in this activity, students are asked to imagine what they would do if they were put into a similar position to Native nations targeted by the Indian Removal Act. After learning a little bit about the history, students are asked to complete an if-then statement. If someone powerful told you you had to leave your home and move far away, what would you do? The main choices provided are 1, take the money and move. 2, resist using the courts or nonviolence. 3, stay and try to blend in. Or 4, refuse to move and be willing to fight. So I wonder if you see another option in these. There's always maybe a fifth other option. But please, if you'd like to, feel free to share. What would you do if you're put into this situation? If someone powerful told you you had to leave your home and move far away, what would you do? Next slide, please. So the goal of this activity is to develop students' perspective-taking skills. Students will often ask for more details and context about the situation to help make that decision, which helps them understand the factors that Native leaders had to take into account when making decisions for their nations. We use this activity as a jumping off point to dive deeper into 6 specific cases of removal from various regions so students can see the wide variety of perspectives and challenges. Next slide, please. So the 6 cases that we explore include the Potawatomi, the Cherokee, Seminole, Kickapoo, Shawnee, and Eastern Cherokee nations. Now, each of these nations who their leaders are represented here face devastating consequences no matter what choice they've made regarding removal. But here they each represent some of the common choices made by Native nations at the time. Quickly starting on the far left, Chief Menominee of the Potawatomi Nation refused to sign a treaty and attempted to stay in their homelands. Next, John Ridge, a member of the Cherokee Nation, decided to take the money and move by choice. Next, Seminole leader Osceola tried to negotiate but ended up in armed conflict with the United States. Wapekakwa of the Kickapoo Nation decided to leave the United States altogether and seek safety in Mexico. Shawnee leader Katahikasa planned to stay in their homelands and try to blend in, but were eventually removed. And lastly, another group of Cherokee, known as the Eastern Band of Cherokee, represented here by William Holland Thomas, found a way to remain in their homelands by purchasing land from the state of North Carolina. So this perspective-taking activity helps students connect with stories from the past while diversifying the narrative of American history. Native peoples did not experience removal in one way, but in many ways. And even nations amongst themselves, oftentimes people did not agree on what to do. So being specific and understanding multiple examples, students can understand that removal was a widespread and complex issue to face. Next slide, please. So one of the stories that our museum both clarifies and complicates through our online resources and our exhibitions is the Cherokee Trail of Tears. In the face of the Indian Removal Act, the Cherokee Nation is an example of a nation that was split on what to do. There were a small group of Cherokee that thought the right thing to do was sign the Treaty of New Echota and leave their homelands. They were known as the Treaty Party, and they were led by a man we saw earlier, John Ridge. However, John Ridge was never the official leader or principal chief of Cherokee Nation. The principal chief at the time, his name was John Ross, and he disagreed. John Ross and most Cherokee people did not want to voluntarily leave and give up their homelands. This disagreement caused internal conflict because John Ridge, he never had this right to sign the treaty since he was not the leader of Cherokee Nation. John Ross, principal chief, tried to resist removal by using the courts to challenge the Treaty of New Echota, and thousands of Cherokee people signed a petition in protest of the illegal treaty. But ultimately, in 1838, the US sent armed troops to forcibly remove Cherokee people from their homes and into relocation camps, eventually west to Indian Territory. About 4,000 Cherokee people, or about 1/4 of the population at the time, died in camps or along the Trail of Tears. There's a short video that was created to share a simplified version of this story and features Cherokee citizens today sharing the perspective of this history, and the link will be shared in the chat. As a rule of thumb, when we're going to talk about Native issues and Native history, going to the nation themselves and hearing about how they tell their stories are often the best way to learn about Native history in the United States. Many nations, including the Cherokee, have their own websites, history resources, museums, and archives where they record and interpret their own history. And that is usually the best place to start when doing your research. Next slide, please. This image shows an artist's depiction of the Cherokee Trail of Tears, which is somewhat of a kind depiction compared to what some survivors recalled. Between 1830 and 1850, the United States used treaties, gun and bayonet-toting soldiers, private contractors, to remove about 100,000 Native peoples from their homelands to territories west of the Mississippi. During Andrew Jackson's presidency alone, about 46,000 people were removed west, opening more than 100 million acres of tribal land for white settlement. Next slide, please. Although they experienced removal, the Cherokee Nation persevered. They reestablished their government in Indian Territory, rebuilt their nation, and remained strong in their culture. One group of Cherokee even retained some of their homelands by purchasing lands in North Carolina through an adopted white tribal member we saw earlier, William Holland Thomas. But these different decisions among the Cherokee resulted in the Cherokee Nation being made up of 3 nations today, the Eastern Band of Cherokee in North Carolina, the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, and the United Kituwa Band in Oklahoma. And each of these nations' seals can be seen here. So if we go back and reflect on our compelling question, what does it mean to remove a people? We can see that there isn't one right or wrong answer. Removal was not only a policy and a law, but a catastrophic experience for people and the beginning of a much longer, more complicated story of Native nations' relationships with the United States. Most importantly, prioritizing the Native perspective of how these nations made their decisions helps students see a perspective they might not have been presented with before. And rather than focusing on the narrative of the United States' desire to gain land, this approach centers the agency and resiliency of Native nations that continue to face challenges to their land and sovereignty today. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please feel free to share them in the chat. I would like to now pass it on to our next presenter, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Gabby, and for diving into some of that really complicated history when it comes to removal. We're going to move a little bit further out west for our next example and our next compelling question, which is who really won the Battle of Little Bighorn? The image you can see on your slide here is taken from our Americans Gallery, and it is a ledger art drawing that was created by Red Horse, a man from the Lakota Nation who was present at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. This is a story that many of us are familiar with. Custer unexpectedly loses to a large number of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho men at the encampment which he attacked. The Battle of Little Bighorn, or Custer's Last Stand, quickly grew in popularity only days after it took place. This story was often told over and over again by journalists and entertainers, mostly for a non-Native audience. Our museum has multiple ledger art drawings depicting the Battle of Little Bighorn, which helps us to understand the Native perspective of what happened. Ledger art drawings and paintings are one of the quintessential art forms used by cultures on the Great Plains, so they're a great primary source to use in your classroom when discussing events of the Battle of Little Bighorn or talking about cultures on the Great Plains, such as the Lakota, Cheyenne, or Arapaho, as other drawings generally depict ways of life. Often the story of the Battle of Little Bighorn is left incomplete, ending with Custer's crushing defeat. However, just 8 months later, after the Battle of Little Bighorn took place, the U.S. won the Great Sioux War and forced almost all Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho onto reservations. Which brings us back to that compelling question: who really won the Battle of Little Bighorn? But this narrative discussed here isn't what most of the public saw during this time period. Instead, they were captured by Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. Next slide, please. So when I say the words American Indian or Native American, what images might come to mind? You can feel free to share these answers in the chat. I ask this question because I think it's important to discuss the source for a lot of these images and stereotypes of Native people that we can still see today. Buffalo Bill's Wild West stage show blurred lines between history and entertainment, and one of its most popular performances was reenactments of this battle. People who fought at the Battle of Little Bighorn were instantly lauded as celebrities, and the Plains Indian warrior became a famous character recognized around the world. These shows are only the start of this trend, and soon we see posters, postcards, programs, dime novels, and even tour maps that all depict the Battle of Little Bighorn. All of these show a story of a thrilling Western and the adventures we are familiar with today between cowboys and Indians. Next slide, please. This story is both bittersweet and incomplete. One activity you can practice with your students is comparing two images from this time period. And these two images show vastly different stories about the buffalo hunt. On this slide, we see an image from the Jamestown Exposition titled Indian Buffalo Hunt in the Wild West Show. We see men on horseback wearing headdresses hunting buffalo. And this was done as reenactment for spectators. We spoke earlier about developing very specific examples and not to generalize Native cultures. Instead, these Wild West shows and expositions further homogenize an image of the Plains Indian instead of using specificity such as Lakota or Cheyenne. This homogenized image is eventually applied to all Native peoples. Next slide, please. This next image shows what's actually happening during the time period. During the 1800s, another way the US attempted to control Native populations of the Great Plains was through the hunting of buffalo. White settlers hunted the buffalo into near extinction. At the end of the 19th century, there were less than 400 wild bison left. We can see this as a direct attack on the culture and lifeway of the Lakota, Oglala, Yanktonai, Santee, and many more nations. These same nations were now living on reservations in the aftermath of the Great Sioux War and the Battle of Little Bighorn. These combined efforts of the reservation system and the overhunting of bison left many nations dependent on the United States government. This is a much bleaker picture than one painted for tourism and entertainment purposes. But the decimation of buffalo and the move to reservations does not mark the end of Native history. These nations still exist today and continue to raise buffalo. Next slide, please. Ron Brownotter, the man you can see on your screen now, who is the owner of the largest Native-owned buffalo ranch, states, "I'm raising buffalo because I'm a Lakota Yanktonai person on Standing Rock. We're surviving here. It's who we were and who we are." So I'd like to point out that a lot of the photos in this section have been in black and white, but here I've ended on a color photo. And this is a way to help subtly remind your students that Native people are not frozen in the past. Many images of Native people are from the 1800s or earlier, and they ignore the continuance of Native cultures. Next slide, please. One of the lasting images we see emerge from the Battle of Little Bighorn is the Plains Indian headdress, or the eagle feather headdress. And with it, I want us to think about our final compelling question for this session. What does it mean to honor someone? This is one of the most instantly recognizable images that people associate with American Indians, but it's also one of the most misunderstood. This type of headdress, the one you see on your screen, is called a wapaha, and this word comes from the Lakota language. The headdress you see in the image is from the Sicangu Lakota culture. There are many different kinds of headdresses, but these eagle feather headdresses are only worn by tribes of the Great Plains. And each one of the feathers has to be earned through acts of diplomacy, courage, and generosity, or through a life accomplishment. To understand the importance of this, we often use a video clip of a Lakota elder, Dwayne Hollow Hornbear, who states, "The individual who wears this eagle feather headdress has earned prestige and accepted responsibility, and portrays these in a very humble way of life." So you may have noticed this direct quote here, and earlier I did the same when talking about Ron Brownotter. And these are modern quotations from members of these nations. And this is another way to incorporate Native perspective into your classroom by directly quoting Native voices. Finally, to better contextualize the cultural significance of the Wapaha to students, you can compare it to a Purple Heart or other awards earned during military service. And considering this cultural significance of the Wapaha, I once again want to return to our compelling question. Next slide, please. So what does it mean to honor someone? Often we hear that wearing a costume or paper headdress, like we can see on our slide, is a way of honoring Native peoples. Our other image comes directly from Americans, and it is of a Tootsie Roll wrapper. We can see in that highlighted circle that we have an image of a boy who is also wearing a costume headdress. And you can still find this packaging today. Images of costume headdresses can be found throughout the Americans exhibition, and I'm sure most of us can think of an example where we've seen them in daily life, perhaps during Halloween or even at a music festival. How do we think these images affect Native children in the classroom? Please feel free to answer in the chat. We mentioned earlier those NK360 resources, and one handout you can find on our website is titled Native American Cultures and Clothing. Native American is not a costume, which deals with these issues. These topics can often be uncomfortable for both students and educators, but by providing these alternative perspectives, we make sure that our classrooms are more inclusive towards all. Please feel free to ask any questions about the Battle of Little Bighorn or the Wapaha into the chat. Thank you so much, and I will now pass it back to Adrian. Next slide, please.
Well, thank you, Jenny. So, in conclusion, we want to say that when creating lessons on Native peoples, remember to look at it from a Native perspective. Ask yourself, are you critically evaluating the assumptions and stereotypes of Native people? Are you including Native voices from both the past and the present? To find those, you want to take time to look at your locations and resources and to use Indigenous words or names and themes local to you. For compelling questions, write them like a hook and make them open ended. Those are what are the most eye catching. Next slide, please. So, as a reminder, there are great resources that you can draw from to help you in creating compelling questions and sharing Native perspective on our museum website, and specifically Native Knowledge 360. You'll see the link dropped in the chat. Next slide, please. So here is our team's contact information. If you'd like to reach out to us directly, if you have any questions now, you can drop those in the chat. But if something comes available later to you, feel free to email us and we'll answer your questions. Shannon, do we have any questions in the chat from earlier that we can answer in our remaining time?
Hi there. Yes, we had some excellent questions, particularly also some great contributions from our audience members who also had some great resources. But one of the main ones that it looked like a few folks asked was, I think, Adrian, you may be best to answer this. Is there a recommended age or maturity level that teachers should sort of focus in on when telling these complicated, complex, and sometimes almost possibly re-traumatizing histories?
What do you think about it? As a Native person, I don't think so. I was taught our removal, the Cherokee removal, at a very early age. So I think as long as you go about it in a respective way, also just talking to students about how they might make them feel. There are ways to simplify some of these very hard and challenging topics that even young students understand. For example, about fairness, like talking about fairness, or talking about if someone were to speak up for you that told your story and you didn't get to, finding those more simplified ways can help you talk about those really challenging and complex topics. Thanks for the question. Are there
And
any others?
yes, I think maybe Gabby might be great to answer this one. Um, so some folks were just asking this really basic question we get at the museum a lot, which is, what is the appropriate language to use? They've heard terms like Indigenous, Native American. They've heard us use specific tribal names today and chiefs' names. Should they avoid using Indian? What is the general recommendation from NMAI?
Thank you. Yes, this is a great question. And like Shannon said, we get this question a lot. It's a very fair question because language is very complicated. But our NK360 has a specific resource about this. What's the correct terminology to use? Words like Indigenous, Native, Native American, even Indian are all general terms and are all used by different people. And people have individual preferences as to what terminology they feel that they identify with and is appropriate for them. When I spoke about American Indian removal, we use that term American Indian because it is a legal term in that context. But there are always different preferences that individuals have, and whenever possible, it's best to be specific. If you know the specific name of a culture or nation to use that name. For example, I use Native Hawaiian or Kanaka Maoli to introduce myself. Should we avoid using the term Indian? That's also a question that's based on personal preference. It is the name of our museum, the National Museum of the American Indian. That comes from a historical reason of where we got our collections, but it's also a term that has been reclaimed and is still used today in society as well as by the government and by the law. So it's always best to ask people what the best terminology is to use, and it depends on the context for sure. Thank you.
Any other questions?
There were a couple of great questions, but some of them we do encourage you all to reach out to us directly because we will not be able to cover it in the short amount of time we have left. So I believe that our contact information has been posted on the summit's website. We are happy to answer any questions you all might have if you are able to email us. But past that, thank you all so much for all these great things in the chat. I have very much enjoyed watching all of the interactions. Thank you.
So yes, like Shannon was saying, thank you everyone. We hope you enjoyed our session. We'll also be presenting tomorrow in person at 1:15 in the Arts and Industries building if you happen to be around. But we want to thank everyone for attending our session. We hope you enjoyed it.